Linda Matthews sat in the passenger seat of her son's brand-new Tesla, watching the rain streak across the windshield, when the words came that would change everything. "You know you're going to die poor, right?" Marcus said it casually, the way he might comment on the weather. He didn't even glance at her, just kept his eyes on the highway, one hand steering while the other scrolled through his phone at a red light. "I mean, look at you. You're 58 and you've got what, maybe 80 grand saved. That's not even a year of my salary." Linda's breath caught in her chest. She felt her face flush, not from anger, but from something deeper. Shame, maybe, or recognition of a truth she'd been running from her entire life. She was a woman who had done everything right, or so she thought. She'd worked as a registered nurse for 36 years. She'd raised Marcus and his sister Sarah alone after their father walked out. She'd never missed a mortgage payment, never carried credit card debt beyond a month or two, never bought anything she couldn't afford. She volunteered at the church, mentored young nurses, and made her famous lasagna for every family gathering. By any reasonable standard, she was successful. But Marcus wasn't measuring her by any reasonable standard. He was measuring her against himself, a 32-year-old venture capitalist who drove a car that cost more than Linda's entire house was worth, who talked about stock portfolios and cryptocurrency and passive income streams with the ease of someone who had never known real financial anxiety. "That's not fair," she said quietly, her hands gripping her purse in her lap. "I've provided for my family. I've never asked anyone for help." Marcus laughed, not unkindly, but with the particular condescension of someone who had figured something out that he believed you never would. "Mom, that's the problem. You're proud of just getting by. You work one of the most stressful jobs in the world, and you've set yourself up so that you'll have to work until you literally can't anymore. That's not a life plan. That's a trap." He pulled into her driveway, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a well-maintained yard in a quiet suburb of Portland. It had been paid off for 8 years. She'd always been proud of that house. Now, as Marcus dropped her off, barely bothering to walk her to the door, she felt the weight of his words settle over her like a cold fog. He'd said it as a fact, not an insult, which somehow made it worse. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to the empty space that had belonged to her late husband Robert for 43 years, and she thought about what it meant to die poor. What it meant to spend 60 years being responsible and cautious and good, only to end up exactly where Marcus said she would, dependent, struggling, without options. At 3 a.m., she got up and went to her small office, a converted bedroom where she kept her filing cabinet and her old desktop computer. She pulled up her bank accounts, her retirement statements, her social security projections. The numbers were as she remembered them, respectable but not impressive. If she lived to 90 and the market didn't crash and she was careful, she might make it work. Might. But what if she lived to 95? What if she got sick and needed care before then? What if, God forbid, something happened to one of her children or grandchildren and she wanted to help without destroying her own security? The thought that kept her awake, though, was simpler and more painful. What if Marcus was right? Linda started researching. At first, it was just late-night Googling, financial blogs, investment websites, YouTube videos from successful people who explained how they'd built wealth. She read books. She listened to podcasts during her shifts at the hospital. She joined an online investing group for women over 50, which was where she discovered Robert Chen. Robert wasn't a guru or an influencer. He was a 64-year-old retired software engineer who'd started investing at 25 and was now mentoring others. More importantly, he wasn't selling anything. When Linda asked him how someone her age with her capital could realistically build real wealth, he didn't promise her the moon. The time to start investing was 20 years ago, he told her over a video call. The second best time is today. You've got good income, steady income, and you've proven you can live below your means. Those are assets. The question is, what are you going to do with them? What she did was something that terrified her. She met with a financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who ran an independent practice not far from the hospital. Patricia reviewed her finances with a clinical eye, nodding along as Linda explained her situation, her fears, and her suddenly fierce determination to not die poor. The biggest thing I'm seeing, Patricia said, after about an hour, is that you have income that exceeds your living expenses, and you have almost no investment strategy. You're putting a little into your 401k because your employer matches it, but you're leaving a tremendous amount on the table. I'm afraid of losing money, Linda admitted. I'm not a risk taker. Okay, but you're currently taking the biggest risk of all, the risk of inflation, of stagnation, of working until you're 75 because your money never grew. How does that feel? It felt exactly the way Marcus's comment had felt, like the truth she'd been avoiding. Patricia walked her through a plan. At 58, with 8 years until she could claim Social Security and potentially 15 or 20 years until retirement, Linda had a window. In that window, she could afford to take calculated risks. She could invest aggressively in her 401k, maxing out her contributions. She could open a brokerage account and start building a diversified portfolio. She could even explore real estate. Patricia mentioned that several clients her age had bought rental properties and built substantial income streams. Here's what I'd suggest as a starting point, Patricia said, pulling up some spreadsheets. You could invest about $24,000 a year in your 401k. That's the 2023 limit. You could move $15,000 of your emergency fund into a high-yield savings account and invest the rest. And then, I'd like you to consider taking $200,000 of your liquid assets and making some strategic investments, a diversified portfolio of index funds, some real estate investment trusts, that kind of thing. Linda heard the number and felt her stomach drop. $200,000. That's about a third of your current savings. You'd still have your emergency fund, and with your income, you'd rebuild quickly. But Linda, do you know what $200,000 growing at even a modest 7% return annually could become in 10 years? Nearly $400,000. In 15 years, nearly $600,000. That's not counting the compounding effect of your additional annual investments. The numbers were abstract enough to be unreal, but they were also seductive. That was the moment Linda made her decision, not in some grand, confident way, but in the quiet, terrified way that real change often happens. She decided to believe that she was capable of more than she'd allowed herself to become. The first 6 months were brutal. Linda opened the brokerage account and, hands shaking, invested $200,000. She watched the market fluctuate with the intensity of someone watching a loved one in intensive care. When the S&P 500 dropped 8% in a single week, she nearly called Patricia to pull everything out. She didn't. She held on. She also went back to school, not for a degree, but for education. She took a course on real estate investing. She attended a seminar on starting a side business. She read The Intelligent Investor and actually understood it the second time through. Most importantly, she changed her mindset. Instead of thinking, I can't afford this, she started thinking, is this the best use of my money? It was a subtle shift, but it cascaded through everything. She stopped eating out. She cut her clothing budget. She renegotiated her car insurance and her internet bill. She started selling things she didn't need on Facebook Marketplace. Old furniture, collectibles, clothes from her closet that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Those small amounts, $50 here, $200 there, $3,000 for the antique dresser that Robert's mother had given her, got funneled right back into her investments. And then came the real decision. Patricia had been talking about real estate investment for months. Linda's city was booming. Portland was becoming increasingly expensive, which meant property values were rising. There was a duplex for sale 6 blocks from her house, a charming 1970s building that was renting for $2,800 per unit. With a down payment and a conventional mortgage, it would cost about $800,000. With proper financing, it could work. You'd be able to cover the mortgage with rental income, Patricia explained, and the property would appreciate over time. In 10 years, it could easily be worth $1 million to, maybe more. But that's a lot of money, Linda said. That's debt, real debt. Yes, good debt. Debt that builds wealth instead of consuming it. Linda had never carried a mortgage bigger than her first house. The idea of owing nearly $1 million made her feel ill. It made her feel irresponsible. But it also made her feel something else, alive. She went to look at the property. It was a well-maintained building in a good neighborhood, owned by an older couple who were moving to be closer to their grandchildren. The current tenants were long-term and reliable. The numbers made sense. She went home and did something she hadn't done in years. She called her daughter Sarah. Sarah was a therapist, and when Linda explained the whole situation, Marcus's comment, her research, Patricia's plan, the duplex, Sarah listened without interrupting. Then she said something that Linda didn't expect. "I think you should do it." "Really?" "Mom, you've spent your entire life playing it safe. And where has it gotten you? You're brilliant, you're capable, and you're about to spend 20 more years being afraid." Marcus was cruel about how he said it, but maybe he was right about the thing itself. Maybe you deserve more. It took Linda another month to work up the courage. She had conversations with her accountant about the tax implications. She had her lawyer review everything twice. She visualized the worst-case scenarios, the tenants not paying, the building falling apart, interest rates going up. She imagined all the ways it could go wrong. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in September, she signed the papers. The $800,000 mortgage was the biggest financial commitment of her life. It was terrifying. It was also, and this was the part that surprised her, exhilarating. 3 years later, Linda stood on the porch of that duplex, now fully managing 2 units, each bringing in $3,200 per month, and did the math. Her brokerage account had grown to $480,000. Her 401k was approaching $250,000. The duplex, according to the latest appraisal, was worth $1.2 million. With the mortgage remaining, her equity in it was roughly $420,000. Add in her paid-off house, her other savings, and her Social Security projections, and Linda's net worth had grown from roughly $500,000 to approximately $2.1 million. She'd done it. She'd made that $2 million decision, not in a single moment of boldness, but in a series of small choices, each one slightly braver than the last. Marcus called her one evening, right before Thanksgiving. He'd heard through Sarah about the real estate investment, and he wanted to talk about it. When she'd first told him what she was doing, he'd been skeptical. "Mom, you're a nurse, not a landlord," he'd said dismissively. But then something shifted. He started reading her emails about investment returns. He started asking questions. "I've been thinking about what I said," he told her on the phone. "When I dropped you off that night." Linda's hand tightened on the phone. "I was being a jerk. I was measuring your success by my standards, not yours. But here's the thing, I've run the numbers on what you've done in 3 years, and I'm genuinely impressed. You didn't just invest money, you fundamentally changed your relationship with risk and with your own capability." Linda felt tears in her eyes, not because Marcus was proud of her, though that was nice, but because she was proud of herself. "I want to tell you something," Marcus continued, and she could hear the rare humility in his voice. "I've made more money than you. I probably always will, at least in raw numbers. But you've done something harder. You changed. You scared yourself and you did it anyway. Most people just accept what they think they can be. You decided what you wanted to become and you became it." After they hung up, Linda sat in her living room, the room she'd sat in thousands of times before, on nights when she'd felt too small, too limited, too ordinary, and she thought about the person she'd been. That Linda had believed in hard work and responsibility. Those were good things. But that Linda had also believed that people like her, ordinary people, working people, people who'd made certain choices early and had to live with them, couldn't have more. Couldn't build wealth, couldn't take risks, couldn't reinvent themselves. She'd been wrong. The money, in the end, wasn't really the point, though it was nice. The point was the person she'd become in the process of making it. Someone who read and learned, someone who asked for help, someone who was willing to be a beginner even at 58 years old, someone who understood that it wasn't too late, that she wasn't locked into the life she'd lived so far, that there were still chapters to write. She thought about women like her, nurses and teachers and administrators and secretaries who'd spent decades thinking their options were limited by their starting position. She thought about how many of them might be one conversation, one book, one decision away from becoming something more. Linda had come to understand something that she wished someone had told her at 25. It's not about when you start. It's about whether you're willing to start. She was 59 years old when she made that $2 million decision. By 62, she had the net worth to back it up. And she'd never felt more alive. Epilogue, 2 years later. Linda Matthews stood in front of a group of women in the community center's meeting room. There were about 30 of them, different ages, different backgrounds, but all with the same hungry look in their eyes. The same look she remembered having 3 years ago, when she'd first allowed herself to imagine that her future didn't have to look like her past. "I'm not here to tell you that I got rich," she told them. "I'm here to tell you that I got brave, and the bravery came before the money." She walked through her journey, not glossing over the fear, not pretending it was easy. She talked about the nights she couldn't sleep, the moments she almost quit, the times she had to believe in herself even when nobody else did. "My son told me I would die poor," she said, and watched the women nod in recognition. This particular pain was almost universal. And maybe he was right if I'd kept doing things the way I'd always done them. But I didn't. I decided that the life I'd been living wasn't the only life I could have, and that decision was worth $2 million. She paused, looking at each face in the room. "The money is nice, but the real wealth is knowing that at 58 years old, I was still capable of growing, still capable of changing, still capable of becoming more than I thought I could be. That's worth more than any dollar amount." As she walked off the stage, Linda pulled out her phone and texted Sarah. "Spoke to 30 women today about investing. Signed 12 up for Patricia's course." Sarah texted back immediately, "Mom, you're doing the thing." Linda smiled. She was, and the best part was knowing she had plenty of time to keep doing it. The girl who had never taken a real risk had become the woman who'd bet everything on herself, and she'd won.